"Play and I'll marry you," laughed the millionaire woman, until the janitor started playing like a genius. In the glow of crystal and cameras, a single offhand phrase turns a janitor into a man from whom no one can look away. Music shatters the familiar order, and one impulsive challenge puts reputation, habit, and power at stake. Who will break first when the hall falls silent to a whisper? Before we begin the story, write in the comments which part of the world you are watching from today. If someone had told Marcus Reed that morning that in the evening, he would be the center of attention in the entire hall, he would have just smirked. His work at the hotel didn't include attention, and he knew how to remain invisible better than anyone in that building. That evening began like hundreds of others, the sparkle of crystal chandeliers, perfectly ironed tablecloths, music from the speakers, quiet, not disturbing conversations. Guests in expensive attire walked down the red carpet. Photographers captured successful shots, and the staff seemed to dissolve into the general motion, providing the illusion of a perfect evening. Marcus stood at the edge of the hall holding a tray. His hands moved automatically: take an empty glass, remove a napkin, wipe spilled wine. No one looked him in the eyes, no one called him by name. Here he had only one title: employee. He had long since grown used to it. Once, he was a man introduced from the stage, but now just part of the background. In the center of the hall stood a Steinway grand piano, black and polished to a mirror shine. Every time he passed by, Marcus involuntarily lingered with his gaze. Once his fingers had played one just like it, and sometimes even better. He could close his eyes and remember how each note sounded, how it resonated in the hall. But that was in another life, before his mother's illness, debts, and the prejudice of music committees put a cross on his career. The guests laughed, toasts followed one after another. Everything was proceeding according to plan, until a small incident ruined the illusion. Marcus bent down for a fallen glass, and a few drops of champagne landed on the light dress of Victoria Whitmore, the hostess of the evening. She froze as if time had stopped. People around were watching, everyone saw what happened. "Seriously?" Her voice was quiet, but steel rang in it. "Learn at least to hold a tray level." Marcus straightened up and wanted to apologize, but Victoria didn't give him a chance. She smiled at the guests as if it were just an amusing episode, but her eyes remained cold. "You know what, friends," she said, raising her glass to the audience. "This young man seems to think he can do whatever he wants. They say he can play piano. Maybe we should check." Laughter rang out in the hall. "If he plays better than a professional," her voice grew louder, "I will marry him." The laughter intensified. Someone whistled. Someone added a joke with an unpleasant undertone. For the audience it was entertainment, for Victoria a demonstration of power. Marcus looked at her calmly. "I don't want marriage," he said, "but if I play better, you'll fulfill any promise I choose, so that everyone here is witness." The hall quieted slightly. Somebody chuckled, someone exchanged puzzled glances, and Marcus already knew that this evening would not be like all the others. Marcus stood still, holding the tray in one hand. The smell of champagne in the hall mixed with perfume, and a light nervousness of the crowd who loved these little dramas. The guests' smiles were curious but unfriendly. Victoria, as if enjoying the moment, took a step toward the piano and turned to him. "Well then, show us your talent. Or are those just rumors?" Marcus placed the tray on a waiter's station nearby. His movements were slow but assured, like a man who had already made a decision. "I'll play," he said. "But if the audience admits I did better than expected, you keep your word." "Not as a joke." "This is not a court," Victoria laughed, addressing the hall. "But if everyone agrees," people whispered. Someone said, "Come on, this will be fun." Another added, "Finally, something interesting." To most, it was just entertainment. No one expected a regular janitor to surprise anyone. "Sit down," Victoria said mockingly, pointing at the piano. "Just try not to damage the instrument. It's a Steinway." Every step he took echoed in his head with memories. The warm light of concert halls, the smell of varnish and wood, his mother's gaze from the first row. He sat down, ran his hand across the lid as if checking whether this was the same kind of instrument he used to play for hours. At that moment, Lena, a waitress who had worked at the hotel for 3 years, stopped nearby. She knew Marcus better than the others. She had seen how he sometimes lingered in the empty hall after events, quietly touching the keys until cleaning duty pulled him back. There was still quiet laughter in the hall, but it gradually subsided. "What will you play?" Victoria asked, clearly expecting a simple tune. "Summertime," Marcus replied, "but not the way you're used to hearing it." He placed his hands on the keys, and the first sounds came out softly, with deep intonation. It wasn't a loud display of power. On the contrary, the music came from within, as if he were speaking personally to each person in the hall. His fingers moved steadily but precisely. In the pauses you could hear the audience breathing. The laughter disappeared. People stopped whispering. Even the waiters froze, unwilling to interrupt the flow. Victoria, standing with her glass, frowned slightly. She hadn't expected that someone she'd just humiliated could stay so calm and confident. In the far corner, a journalist from a cultural newspaper raised an eyebrow. He was clearly paying attention now. When Marcus finished the first piece, a silence settled over the hall. No one applauded immediately. The moment was too fragile. Well, Victoria tried to bring back the lightness that was cute. "That was only the first piece," Marcus replied without standing up. "I'm not finished." He started a new melody, strict, precise, almost mathematical. The sonata sounded as if every note was measured with surgical precision, but with emotion held on the verge. Victoria stepped back. The audience was no longer just listening, they were watching every movement. Some guests began recording video. In Marcus's mind there was no Victoria, no guests or hotel. Only the keys, the music, and the memory that he once knew how to make people listen. When the sonata ended, the first row stood up. Applause filled the hall, and for a moment Marcus was again where he had been many years ago, on stage under the spotlights, not in the shadows. But he knew this was only the beginning of a night that would change everything. Marcus was still at the piano when the applause began to fade. The atmosphere clearly shifted. Now they looked at him not as staff, but as the man who had just silenced 50 influential guests. Victoria stood with her glass. The smile on her face seemed a bit strained. The pause dragged on, and someone in the audience called out with a slight challenge, "Well, Victoria, keep your word." Several voices agreed, but the hostess did not rush to answer. She took a sip as if considering her strategy, and slowly approached the piano. "You know," she said loudly so everyone could hear, "I think we haven't decided what better than a professional really means. One piece isn't enough." "Then let's decide right now," Marcus responded. "If you want, I'll play more." The crowd reacted instantly, "Yes, another one, let him prove it." But behind their support there still wasn't real respect, it was still just a game. "All right," Victoria said, raising her hand so everyone would quiet down. "But if we continue, let there be rules. You'll play 2 more pieces. One classical to test technique. And one," she smirked slightly, "difficult for true masters." "Agreed," Marcus said shortly. "But then, if the audience admits I succeeded, you'll do what I ask." "Not money," someone in the hall clarified, clearly expecting he wanted cash. "Not money," he said firmly, "and it's not for me." A ripple of curiosity went through the hall. Victoria gave him an assessing look, as though trying to understand what he was after. But arguing in front of witnesses was dangerous. She had a reputation as a woman who always keeps her word. "Agreed," she said. "But the audience will judge." In the far corner stood a man in glasses, about 50, with a neat beard. It was David Chin, a music critic known for his harshness. He raised his hand. "If you don't mind, I'm willing to be the one to say whether it's at a professional level." Victoria nodded, as if this satisfied her. In reality, Shinuchin rarely praised anyone, so the risk of losing was small.